no one has ever mentioned that a literal slaughter and genocide took place in eastern Ukraine. And even when our president mentioned this during, if my memory serves me right, during a joint press conference with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Later on, Mr. Scholz described the claim about the genocide as ridiculous or laughable.
Hello, my name is Donald, and welcome to the #1 media company, WorldView. At WorldView, we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. Today, we're chatting to the press attache to the Russian embassy, Alexander Arefiev. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Alex, it's so great to have you. I watched the interview you did on Morning Shot, and recommend anyone to go and check it out, where you make a very articulate case for the Russian side. Can you give us some more detail? I know you talked about it in that interview, but can you give us some more detail of how Russians are being mistreated in the eastern part of Ukraine?
Well, mistreated is a way to put it mildly, because, well, I actually would like to split my answer into two parts, if you don't mind. First is the, mistreatment part, and second is the outright slaughter and genocide part, because mistreatment, when it comes to Russian-speaking population of Ukraine, Russians by passport, Russians by origins, and all the people who consider themselves Russians, this mistreatment takes place in all parts of Ukraine, actually, not just in the east or southern part. It actually encompasses the entire territory of Ukraine, because the Russian schools are closed in Ukraine. And the education in Russian now in Ukraine is impossible. It's banned by law. All Russian media are blocked in Ukraine, and they're prohibited by law. So Russian language has been consistently evaporated from Ukraine as it never existed there. So the Russian-speaking part of the population just cannot execute their language rights to preserve their culture, preserve their language, and to teach children in Russian language. That's just one part of it. Our common history with Ukrainians has been completely erased and destroyed, because, in particular, our common history of World War II and our defeat of our victory over Nazism. So our common history gets destroyed, gets constant attacks. Russian language is prohibited. It's been eliminated from the public use, basically, because it's restricted now to home use only, and it's just not officially home use. So that's how it is. The media block the languages. They getting eradicated more and more in Ukraine. So that's for the mistreatment part. There are other cases of, let's say, discrimination towards Russian population in Ukraine. And as for the eastern part, we refer as eastern part. Let's refer to the Donbas republics, the Luhansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republics. So, if you don't mind, I'll just give you a brief history of the issue, because it will just give us a proper context of what's going on. So the thing is that when the unconstitutional coup took place in Kiev in 2014, two things happened. One thing is Crimea. First, the Autonomous Republic of Crimea declared independence, and then held referendum for reunification with Russia. But let's put that aside for now. And the Donetsk and Lugansk, not even People's republics back then, they just declared that they don't agree with unconstitutional coup in Kiev. They just don't accept that, because it was a coup in full sense of word. The Ukrainian opposition leaders, they made an agreement with the then President Yanukovych, president of Ukraine. And this agreement was guaranteed by France, Poland, and Germany. But regardless of that, this agreement on peaceful transition of power, it was completely thwarted and put in a trash bin, with full acquiescence coming from the West. Russia drew the Western attention to this because it's just a direct violation of the agreement, and the West did nothing, including the guarantors of this agreement. So it basically was an unconstitutional coup. This is how the current authorities came to power. So the Lugansk and Donetsk disagreed with this, and what the response they got was not democratic, to put it mildly, because instead of dialogue, instead of cooperation, instead of sort of compromise, instead of looking for a way to reconcile two positions, Ukrainians launched a full-scale attack on these two cities. Mind you, there were no armies, there are no ways to defend themselves. So this is basically people's militia, because they had to do something to defend themselves. Again, no armies out there. They called it the anti-terrorist organization operation at first. I believe they changed the title, but it doesn't change the fact that it's basically using of military force against civilian population. So for 8 years, the Kyiv regime, the Ukrainian army, has been bombarding Donetsk and Lugansk, not just those two cities, but these cities in the vicinity, what is now referred to as the territory of Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk Donetsk People's Republic. They had to declare themselves as such because they could no longer see themselves as part of Ukraine, because just basically slaughtering them. And they didn't handpick any targets, so there was no, they couldn't aim for like military infrastructure only because there was no military infrastructure in the first place. So they knew in advance that they were attacking civilian territories. They knew in advance that the Ukrainians knew in advance that they were attacking civilians, knew in advance that they were attacking women and children. Well, the Ukrainian side always presents the figure of 14,000 to 15,000 victims of the conflict in eastern Ukraine, while conveniently forgetting to mention the fact that the majority of those casualties are civilians coming from Lugansk and Donetsk. Can you imagine that? So it's 2022 now, the year 2022. The bombardments began in 2014. So it's basically 8 years of constant attacks, of constant slaughter. It's literally genocide taking place in eastern Ukraine. And for 8 years, imagine the kids that were born in 2014 or later. So they're basically 8 years old now. They should be in school, but they can't go to school because the Ukrainian army attacked them. There was no school. The school was destroyed. Yeah, and not just one school, mind you. So it's constant bombardment. So this is why our resident in particular and other Russian officials, they would describe this as a genocide of Russian population in eastern Ukraine. And mind you, I'm not limiting myself when I'm giving this notion of Russian-speaking population. These are not just Russians by passports. These are people who consider themselves Russian, who want to be Russians, who speak Russian, or who has the ties with Russians. I mean, like by marriage, for example. So in Russia, in Belarus, and Ukraine, it was common to have mixed marriages between Russians and Belarusians, Russians and Ukrainians, because we still consider Ukrainians, regardless of anything, we still consider local common Ukrainians as brotherly people. And that is true. Our president said that in his article. Well, Russians and Ukrainians are indeed brotherly people. And what's going on now in Ukraine is first and foremost a tragedy for us, Russians, and for Ukrainians. That is true. So,
hello, everyone. If you're interested in advertising on WorldView, drop us an email at worldview.help@gmail.com. We will send you an advertisement guide, which will include the rates and the process involved. A typical shout out for your company or project will be between 45 and 60 seconds. By advertising on our platform, you'll be supporting a company that wants to improve the public narrative. Once again, send us an email at worldview.help@gmail.com, which you can also find in the description below. Now, back to the interview. Alex, can you also tell us about the Odessa Massacre? I believe you spoke about it in the interview on Morning Shot.
Yeah, Odessa Massacre is one of the prime examples of how Kyiv regime treated all those who protested against them. So in Odessa, Odessa also saw a peaceful protest by civilians, mind you. So they walked in a peaceful protest against what was going on in Kyiv. But then the nationalists that were deliberately brought to Odessa to suppress this this demonstration. It's not police force. These are just some people, activists, how they put it, or ultranationalists. It doesn't change the fact they're ultranationalists and not neo-Nazis. So they forced the people who participated in the march, in the protest, they forced them to the building of the trade union's house, the trade union's building. Later on, the building was torched, while the police and the fire department of Odessa was doing literally nothing to stop it. So the people were burnt alive. 42 people were burnt alive in this building. And those who tried desperately to save their lives jumped out of windows, well, in a desperate attempt to escape from fire, of course, to end up in the streets. And the neo-Nazi mobsters, I will call how to put it otherwise, they rushed towards those people to finish them off, basically making sure they're dead. This was on 2nd of May 2014. So we're actually approaching the sad anniversary of this event. It's just around the corner. Since then, nothing has happened in terms of investigation. There was practically no investigation conducted, no perpetrators found, nothing. For arson and for mass murdering, nothing of the kind. Again, Russia urged the Kyiv authorities to do something about it. We urged the West to, somehow use its influence over Kyiv to, make them investigate and find the perpetrators, but nothing, it didn't bear any fruit. So it was a massacre. It was real. It's actually known nowadays as Odessa Massacre, and it wasn't even investigated. And well, the Kyiv authorities seemed happy with this because no one was investigating. The presidents changed in Ukraine, the parliament changed, the authorities changed, leadership changed, but this remained the same. Nobody cared about those people in Odessa. This is actually, you mentioned it. It's a good example of how Kyiv treats the civilian population. And nowadays in conflict, they demonstrate the same thing because they basically use the civilians as human shields to guard themselves from Russian attacks. Because Russian troops in Ukraine right now are aiming for military infrastructure only, but the Ukrainian army and the Nazi battalions will just closely cooperating with each other. Well, to put it mildly, they put the heavy equipment, the anti-air guns, you name it. Basically, they're moving military infrastructure into the cities. They hide in civilian infrastructure, like in hospitals, in schools, in kindergartens. They use it for military purposes because they know we're not going to shoot. And I'm not even speaking about the provocations, but I'll speak about that later. It's just a different question, I guess.
I've seen photos of where Western soldiers have given arms to the Azov Regiment, the Nazi organization.
Yes, and that's actually a whole question to discuss, because the West, instead of supplying humanitarian aid, for example, if you care about the civilians that much, but instead of humanitarian aid, they're supplying Ukrainians with weapons, with various kinds of weapons, basically pouring oil on flames of conflict. Because supplying weapons into the conflict zone, it doesn't bring conflict to an end. So we take it, there's just no other way to see it. The West's objective is to prolong the conflict as much as possible, because it gives a good pretext to keep the sanctions intact against Russia, to keep the Russophobia, we'll speak about that later, intact, and to put the pressure on Russia. So that's the only objective. There can be no other objectives for this.
What has the Russian government tried to do to solve this issue for the past 8 years peacefully?
You mean the issue around Ukraine?
Yes, how the Russians have been mistreated, etc., etc.
So first, as I said, we addressed the Kyiv authorities on basically any level. We also accumulated facts of mistreatments of Russia, of discriminations of Russians in Ukraine. It's done by our foreign ministry, the collection of facts. We try to draw the attention of the international community to this. Well, in particular the Europeans, because that's our continent. We share the home space with the Europeans. But the thing is that the West deliberately turned a blind eye on everything that happened, because when the Western officials went to Kiev, they praised Kyiv authorities for democratic reforms. At the same time, the same authorities launched heavy armament, bombarded the Lugansk and Donetsk Republic, but they were praised for democratic reforms of all things. No one has ever mentioned that a literal slaughter and genocide took place in eastern Ukraine. And even when our president mentioned this during, if my memory serves me right, during a joint press conference with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Later on, Mr. Scholz described the claim about the genocide as ridiculous or laughable. We took it to heart, frankly speaking, because for Russians, there's nothing laughable about Nazism and neo-Nazis in Ukraine, right at our borders. There's nothing laughable about children being murdered and civilians being murdered. There's nothing laughable about genocide. This was, well, definitely misplaced. I mean,
to be fair, Alex, to be fair to the Chancellor, isn't he referring specifically to the term genocide? I don't think he...
Yes, indeed, but still, it doesn't change the fact that the West turned a blind eye on the slaughter. So let's not be picky here about the numbers. So let's say, well, pardon my language, but if you kill like 500 people, does it count as genocide or doesn't count yet? This is not the game you want to play. This is inhuman. Like to count how many people should you slaughter more. What is this? An encouragement for Kiev? So what do you suggest for Russia to wait more people to die before Europe finally accepts that's genocide? So it doesn't change the core essence of what was going on in eastern Ukraine. This is why it was faced with such a rejection from both Russian officials and Russian society. That's my point. We can argue about the terms and the definitions, but it doesn't change, as I said, the core essence.
Okay, you've mentioned, I believe, also in an interview with Roman Gabanak that you mentioned that if the Russians had not gone into the Ukraine, the situation would have gone significantly worse. It would have escalated. How would it have gone worse, and what is some proof evidence of that?
Well, it could have gone worse, like in different dimensions. Let's put it this way. First of all, the situation in Ukraine itself would deteriorate greatly because, as it was revealed during our special operation so far, we received the documents that proving that the Ukrainians were launching a full-scale assault on Donetsk and Lugansk in March this year. So they were preparing for attack, and the West has not been helping militarily helping Ukraine militarily. It didn't start since the start of special operation. They've been doing this long ago. So they've been constantly pumping Ukrainian army with various sorts of military equipment, ammunition, and so on. That's military support, how they put it. So they were preparing for a full-scale assault to Donetsk and Lugansk. And who knows? They might have not stopped there at Donetsk and Lugansk because Ukraine was basically used as a battle ram against Russia. So they would have attacked our territory as well. And Ukrainian President Zelensky, he also declared that Ukraine was eager to resume the project of reacquiring nuclear weapons. So that this is a direct threat, as direct as it can possibly get, nuclear weapons. So if nothing stopped them from slaughtering their own people for 8 years, well, there's literally nothing that makes us think that they would stop at this. So that's another dimension how the situation could have escalated. And the people were still dying those 8 years. Even the Ukrainian side violated every single agreement it signed to during this intra-Ukrainian conflict with the Donetsk and Lugansk and Kiev. Minsk agreements, the most notable example. The presidential aide, I might be mistaken with his official position of this gentleman, but let's say Ukrainian official, high-ranking Ukrainian official, and president of Ukraine, Zelensky, said himself that Ukraine is not going to fulfill Minsk agreements at all. Zelensky said that he didn't like the articles of the Minsk agreements, but what language are we speaking here? What do you mean you don't like? You signed to this, you're supposed to fulfill this. And but because being drunk on impunity, acquiescence of the West, the Ukrainian authorities just basically decided they could do whatever they want. They keep speaking about, well, we're just ensuring our security and stuff. With this NATO expansion thing, because the thing here is not the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The problem is not in Ukraine itself. The problem of NATO using Ukraine first as a battleground against Russia and as a foothold against Russia. Because if NATO army is deployed in Ukraine, this is a direct threat to Russia's national security. This is why our initiative in the end of 2021, in December 2021, on the guarantees agreements, draft agreements on security guarantees were submitted to US and NATO. We decided to resolve this issue diplomatically because, guys, this is a red line for us. We can't let that happen because it's a direct threat to our Russian security. In response, we get nothing but arrogance and complete disrespect to our position, like NATO can do whatever it wants. It has open door policy, whatever that means. And Ukraine has a right to ensure its security. Well, that's very nice, but Russia also has a right to ensure its security. And the OSCE commitments, in accordance to the Istanbul document 1999, clearly states that European states cannot bolster their defenses, their security capabilities at the expense of hindering the security capabilities of other states. It's basically if we resolve it to layman's terms and to basic everyday life level, you have your rights and freedoms. I also have my rights and freedoms, but my rights and freedoms are limited by your rights and freedoms. At no point in time I can just declare that I have a right and I can violate your right. No, that's not how it works. So this is why we would try to do something with the Ukrainian side, because let's negotiate. Because for some reason it's been the reason being that it's been forced through media, through official channels, that NATO is the only way to guarantee Ukraine's security. In fact, it is not. From Russia's standpoint, NATO is anything but a stabilizing factor in Europe. There are other ways of ensuring security, and it could have been resolved diplomatically. And it didn't start in December 2021. No, it started in the 90s when NATO was expanding eastwards, and we warned our NATO counterparts to say that, well, dear NATO, please do not expand. First, you promised us not to do this because it's the reason why we agreed to reunification of Germany. And they promised us not to even move to the territory of ex-East Germany. But we all know where they are today. And they will keep saying, like, well, it's not against you, it's against Iran, it's against something else, it's against this and that. But it didn't change the fact that they're moving closer and closer to our borders. And we said that one day we'll reach the red line. So it happened. And by the way, well, one of their counter arguments is that, well, Ukraine does not even qualify as a member of NATO. Well, in 2008 at NATO summit, you said otherwise. For one thing, and we haven't forgotten that. And secondly, if today Ukraine doesn't qualify, what does it change for Russia in strategic perspective? Nothing, because it doesn't qualify today. But what makes you think that it won't qualify tomorrow, or in a week, or in a month? So Russia just can't just wake up every morning and check if Ukraine qualifies or not, because the situation may change during the day. Like in the morning, it doesn't qualify. In the evening, it qualifies.
Alex, I would just quickly want to play devil's advocate and provide you with two counter arguments to the NATO topic. So the one is it's a defensive alliance. So why is the Russian government so concerned about it? And two, I've spoken to some military officers and they've said that it was never a realistic prospect that the Ukraine would join NATO because it's such a clear provocation. It was never a serious proposal. So what would your response be to those two arguments?
Okay, the first one is the defensive alliance, right? Well, yeah, defensive alliance, great. The defensive alliance destroyed Yugoslavia. That's kind of offensive. Well, from way Russia stands. They just destroyed a sovereign European state. Because of what? We can't even recall why. Well, just in the flash of mind. They destroyed a sovereign state in 1999. They destroyed Libya in 2011. They just came there and destroyed the sovereign state. It's offensive. It's purely offensive, and it proved itself offensive over and over and over again. Let aside all that separate NATO members can do, in particular US, like let's say Iraq in 2003. They just obliterated a sovereign state under the pretext of security threat. Iraq is thousands of kilometers away from US. How is this a threat? Well, there actually no explanation what was the threat about. They said about something like chemical, biological weapons. They never found any chemical or biological weapons there. It was proved to be false. So separate NATO members can obliterate sovereign states. NATO is an alliance, at least twice in history, but in the new history of 21st century, twice in the century, they destroyed sovereign states. So it's barely defensive. It's actually anything but defensive. And if my memory serves me right, I can't give you the direct quote, but NATO officials also said that the Asia-Pacific region is now of their interest and it's like zone of their responsibility. What is this? When and where it became actually the zone of responsibility? That's expansion. Basically, what it means is expansion. You can't defend expensively. It just doesn't make any sense. You can't defend by being on march. So they were moving actually, and NATO expanded greatly. Defending from whom exactly? The Soviet bloc was gone, the Warsaw Pact was gone. It kind of made sense during the Cold War age because the Warsaw Pact and the NATO, yes. And it was like defending from the Soviet menace. But well, let me remind you that the NATO alliance was formed in 1949 and Warsaw Pact was founded in 1953 in response to NATO's creation. So they started it, not us. And it wasn't Russia who blocked all the channels of communication between the Russian NATO Council. They did it themselves because all Russia's irresponsible behavior and stuff in 2014, it related to the Crimea issue. So, see, now basically NATO is considered by many like experts in public opinion as a projection of US power in Europe. It's not a defensive alliance in any case. Remind me, please, the second question was?
That it was never a serious prospect that the Ukraine would join NATO because it's such a provocation.
Yes. Well, supplying weapons to Ukraine apparently is not a provocation, if I understand it correctly. It is a provocation, exactly. And fostering the anti-Russian neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine is not a provocation. And well, they held joint exercises, like earlier in the 2000s and in the 90s. I mean, Ukraine and NATO, they were already cooperating with each other. There were NATO facilities in Ukraine. And let aside the biological laboratories funded and supported by US Ministry of Defense, Department of Defense, right? It's called Department of Defense. There are over 20 biological labs doing God knows what in Ukraine, but experimenting with deadly pathogens right at our borders. And who knows? Because well, some experts say that there are hundreds of those laboratories across the globe. Where else are those laboratories? What are they doing there? Nobody knows. It's veiled. You know, the U.S. officials try to shrug it off as those laboratories didn't exist, but they exist. There are those laboratories in Ukraine. So this, well, NATO is clearly anti-Russian. It was created as anti-Soviet. It remained its nature as anti-Russian, regardless of what they say. And well, because we don't see the change of behavior in any sort. And yes, about Ukraine is granting the NATO member status to Ukraine was a clear provocation. Thus, it would never happen. But first, they actually mentioned it in 2008, as I said, at NATO summit. They welcomed the aspiration of Ukraine becoming a NATO member. So that's clearly a provocation even back then, but nothing stopped them from actually voicing this said provocation. And secondly, when we introduced our the draft agreements on security guarantees in 2021 in December, if you had no plans of adopting Ukraine as one of NATO members, and you have no plans of like militarily interact with Ukraine and to reinforce it somehow, what was the problem to give Russia a guarantee of not doing so? There was literally no problem, but apparently there was, because they wanted to keep this pressure on Russia, just to make sure, like to make Russia, how do I put this? Well, they deliberately didn't give us this guarantee because to get this pressure, the point of pressure on Russia. So we can't take that for granted. So if that's true, if what you said in this argument you voiced, if that is true, then give us a guarantee. Your actions suggest otherwise.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I mean, if there's no intention to include Ukraine and NATO, just say it. Make a guarantee, like you say, that it shouldn't happen. But Alex, why is the Western media ignoring the issue of Russian mistreatment, Russian atrocities in the Ukraine? What do these companies stand to benefit from ignoring this issue?
You mean the media?
Yes.
Well, I'm not saying that media is going to benefit anyhow from this. And well, actually, the issue of benefiting is kind of interesting to delve into. Well, let's be consistent with ourselves here. First, your question. I don't think that they stand to benefit something. First of all, they just follow the line. And it's like mass hysteria now in the West, mass anti-Russian hysteria in the West, which is following the line. Because if you don't follow the line, you'll face consequences, very negative consequences, because Russophobia is, well, skyrocketing right now. They're severing the ties with Russia, like we're banning Russian cats from participating in the competition, Russian trees. They refuse to treat Russian patients in hospitals, violating everything conceivable. It's just inhuman, but it's still okay. As long as it's against Russia, it's still okay. So I don't think the media itself wants to benefit from something. They want to be benefited like the following in line, not to be asked questions. Because the companies have been urged to leave Russia and will sever all the economic activities in Russia. Well, even the common people will get swept into this anti-Russian hysteria. Well, there were reports of attacking on the shops that are owned by Russians, attacking Russians, discriminating Russians in Europe, even children in kindergartens and schools, just for the reason they've been Russian. It's pure racism. This is as pure of racism as you can possibly get. But it's legitimized, if I may put it that way. So people are indulged to do this. It's a very dangerous tendency, very dangerous. For two things. First, Russia's not going anywhere. And well, no one's thinking of what's going to happen tomorrow. How are they going to get out of this later on? And secondly, well, speaking from common people, severing your own personal ties with like Russian friends and acquaintances or like Russian colleagues, it doesn't benefit you in any way because you're losing valuable friends. You're losing business contacts. You're losing, well, if you're a businessman, you're losing the market. Well, let's move to that level. You don't gain anything. So the Western elites who are pushing this anti-Russian hysteria, they're using people's emotions, using people's frustration and not understanding of what's really going on for their purposes. Because you're right, it's in the very essence of your question. What do you stand to gain? And the answer is nothing. Exactly. But by the time you realize that you actually gained nothing and you lost quite a lot in this anti-Russian frenzy, it'll be too late. And that's the saddest part about it, because we understand that desire for peace is natural for people. Of course, Russians are no exception in this regard. And we didn't start the special military operation to start a new war just because we're like war hungry or war thirsty or something. No, Russia came there to stop the war that's been waging there for 8 years against civilians. And nobody did anything about this. I don't recall any manifestations in front of Ukrainian embassies across the globe. I don't remember any sanctions introduced against Kiev regime. Can you name me one sanction that was introduced against Kiev? Against, by the reason of their committing atrocities, they're committing war crimes in their own territory. Nothing of the kind. And people say, "Whoa, we never heard of Ukraine." Yeah, there was a conflict for 8 years, and you just now remember there's Ukraine. So it was made deliberate for narrow, selfish political interests to contain Russia's economic development, to contain Russia's international ties, and to move to multipolar world. I mean, put it that way, because the Western, particularly Washington and London, they want to keep this unipolar world intact. when they just order people around what to do, what to think, and how to behave, and what to think of this, what to think of that. Because I recall, I guess it was Time magazine with this cover was released with a cover that says it's about U.S. invasion to Iraq. If my memory serves me right, the cover said, well, the slogan, the front line, the headline said, "Carpet bombings pave way to peace." How do you like it? Carpet bombings pave way to peace. Of course they do. Well, some being sarcastic, but this is what they did. So yeah, this is the saddest thing about the consequences of this restoration history. The media don't stand to gain anything in the way that, well, truth will always find its way. And well, the path of a liar is that of constant lies. So if you lie once, you have to keep lying over and over and over and over and over again. Because if you say truth one more time, the entire construction will just fall. One day, we're sure that truth will find its way. We'll have a clear view of what happened and what to do next. But the people will realize that the media cannot be trusted anymore, because the same media used footage from Star Wars movies to illustrate Russian aggression in Ukraine. Star Wars, of all things. Well, they posted the photos of destroyed bridge, and well, not a single bridge was destroyed by Russia, not even as I mean, not even a small one. They were not even picked as targets, the bridges. Military infrastructure, yes, but not bridges. And they will show the photo of a destroyed bridge and say Russia's destroyed it. Whereas omitting the facts, no, let's put it correctly, omitting the fact who actually destroyed the bridge. And like one of the examples, I actually gave the same example, I believe, in the previous interview with Morning Shots about the Italian newspaper, La Stampa. Russia released the photos of attacks by Kiev, by the Ukrainians on Donetsk. And La Stampa took the same photos and signed it as Russians' attacks on Kiev. And speaking of that, I believe that's a good spot to speak about provocations as well, because like Bucha, let's say, they just keep recycling the story about Bucha, but the Russian troops withdrew from Bucha on the 30th of March. So 3 days, the city was under Ukrainian control, and the mayor of Bucha said that everything is fine, we're going back to the peaceful life. And on the 4th day, they noticed a street full of dead bodies. How do you notice? How do you don't notice a street full of dead bodies for 3 days? They showed in one of their video footage the same street, and it was clear, no dead bodies. And now I heard like 3 different versions who first discovered those bodies. Some people say it was AFP journalists. Some people say it was Ukrainians. So who did this? It's clear provocation. It just doesn't add up even chronologically. And Kramatorsk, let's say. What happened in Kramatorsk? Kramatorsk is under Ukrainians' control. The people were asked to gather at the railway station in Kramatorsk. Once they did, Ukrainians fired a missile at the railway station in Kramatorsk, causing civilian casualties. But the debris of the rocket and the trajectory of its flight pinpoints directly to Ukraine. No Russian troops in the area, so Ukrainians fired this weapon. And the serial number on one of the fragments of the rocket, it clearly points to Ukraine. And moreover, Tochka-U system that actually launched the missile, it's not used in Russian military. This is the reason why the Kramatorsk stories have been quickly hushed up and put under the carpet, swept under the carpet in the West. I don't recall Kramatorsk anymore, because it clearly states that it was Ukrainian provocation. So you see, well, getting back to what you asked, media that are following the hysteria, that no longer pursued the truth. So who abandoned the objective of finding the truth and showing the truth to the people. I believe that these media are doomed to fall into people's distrust and disrespect. So you're basically ruining your reputation.
The reason why I asked that is, for example, Alex, is that, I mean, if you're a media company, a journalist or a reporter, you would want to cover the Odessa massacre because it would be so newsworthy. So that's why I don't understand, because I mean, they are still guided by profits, and that would gain them viewership, a more bigger audience. So why wouldn't they cover that?
Probably it's because, well, it was so quickly ignored, and well, the Western elites tried their best just to ignore this. Well, let's not talk about this. It contradicted the idea of Russia, painting Russia as pure evil and Ukraine is like pure good. It's kind of a, if I may, infantile perception. So like good guys versus bad guys. It's so Hollywood, if I may. But the thing is, it's, well, yeah, if they're pursuing the gains, I mean the financial gains and readership and stuff, well, basically there are something that stops them from doing so, because let's say if someone has a direct control over this media, well, I can just deprive you of all the opportunities, or just close you under some pretext, and you will lose even more than you could have lost for not covering this massacre. It's true that the truth unfortunately becomes the victim of this manipulations, because, well, and if someone will say that, well, Alex, it's just impossible just to close the media for no reason. Well, I'll give you an example of RT and Sputnik. There is a way to close media for no reason. Just claim it Russian propaganda and say, what makes you think that other media cannot fall under the same pretext? Like, oh, you're just writing Russian propaganda. You're closed. That's it. So, in order to keep your job, I guess they ignored this massacre as an example, just as they've been ignoring the 8 years of atrocities. Not everyone. I'm not just, well, there were Western journalists who worked in it. I believe they were. I just can't tell them by names, but it can be that, universal. I guess there were people, independent journalists and stuff. I just can't, well, name them, because I want to be like correct and exact. But the mass media, when speaking about mass media, it's, let's talk about Navalny or something. Let's talk about evil Russians and stuff. So, yeah, unfortunately, it leaves much to be desired.
Alex, many people were puzzled when your government referred to this as a special military operation. Why is it referred to as a special military operation and not an invasion or a war?
Well, first of all, the special military operation, it comes to its objectives, first and foremost. The objectives are denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine, not its occupation. Invasion is a search for occupying something. Well, that's one thing. Secondly, the scope of this operation in terms of the forces and all the resources that put into this operation are limited, because we don't have the numeric advantage of the Ukrainian army and Nazi battalions together. We don't have. It's a limited task force, let's put it that way. So that's a special military operation, still limited use of force, not full-scale assault with everything. Russia is not using its full military potential, because it's not the objective, it's not the case just to obliterate Ukraine and put it into the Stone Age. No. The objectives, as our president specified, is demilitarization and denazification. So this is why it's called special military operation, for reasons. That's it.
What does denazification mean? How do you plan to achieve that goal?
Well, denazification means that Nazi ideology must disappear. Well, it's actually a very deep issue for us. I mean, the denazification. It's way more complex and, if I may put it, important to us Russians, because we still, our recollections of World War II are still vivid and vibrant. Because there's not a single family in Russia and in Ukraine, mind you, who have not been affected by World War II and Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. We would call it the Great Patriotic War. There's well, if I may just add this, well, for context, the wars in Russia are not called patriotic for no reason. Patriotic means everyone, regardless of age, ethnic origins, language, profession, gender, religion, you name it, regardless of anything, stood up to defend against the enemy. That's called patriotic. My country sacrificed 27 million of its citizens to achieve victory over Nazis. Not just on the battlefield, mind you. Those are people who were tortured in concentration camps, taken away as prisoners of war, killed in ethnic cleansing. Because according to Nazi ideology of racial superiority, the Slavic peoples were second rank peoples who were just destined to total destruction. So we paid a really huge price to win this war. This is why we stick to internet. One of the reasons we attach such great importance to the UN-centric system, because UN was one of the outcomes, one positive, you know, how do I put this? It's the manifestations of the lessons we learned from World War II. Creation of UN was only made possible after the defeat of Nazis. It was created in full aspiration of peoples of the world to peace. This is why we attach this great importance, because we paid a huge price to make UN come to life. That's it. So, and denazification, well, Nazi battalions must go. Because, well, Ukraine is the only country in Europe that actually has those battalions as part of the military force. These are not just, well, as the Westerns try to put it, like limited amount of people who worship this ideology. No, those people are armed. Those people are fighting in the front line. Those people are hurting civilians, raping women, killing children. They pose a military threat. They are armed. They are supported by the West. Well, I mean, by the government. Sorry, by the Kiev regime. Because in Kiev and in other cities of Ukraine, there were commemorative marches. Commemorative marches took place in those cities in honor of World War II Nazi collaborators such as Stepan Bandera or Roman Shukevich or others. So they were openly displaying the insignia and, well, the emblems of the Nazi divisions, Nazi collaborators divisions, such as the Galicia division. We call it Galichina in Russian. So it was Nazi collaborators. Even English Wikipedia says so. So it's not like, you know, Kremlin version of anything. No, it's a universally known fact. And after the coup d'etat took place in 2014 in Kiev, the Nazis, neo-Nazis and ultranationalists, well, they gave decisive influence over Ukrainian government, because all those marches were guarded by police. But for one thing, they're not prosecuted in any way. Even when one of the representatives of one of the nationalist organization in Ukraine, they were once apprehended by police once, but once the police, well, actually the story ended that the police had to let them go with no prosecution whatsoever. So Nazi is not prosecuted in Ukraine, in modern Ukraine. Well, the ultranationalists that took part in the Odessa Massacre, they're not prosecuted in any way. And there's actually a law in Ukraine that, well, sort of prohibits the symbols of totalitarian regimes. I'm not recalling it like exactly word by word, but the meaning is this: prohibit the manifestation of the symbols of totalitarian regimes, which means that well, they consider the Soviet regime as totalitarian. So the Red Star, hammer and sickle, Soviet anthem, Soviet flag, they are banned for public use. You get prosecuted if you display it in public, those symbols. But swastika or SS emblem are not mentioned in this law. So you are free to do so. You can show Nazi insignia. Try to do that in Germany, for example. Try to do that in London or elsewhere. In Ukraine, you're free to do so. Even the veterans of this Galichina or Galicia division, they hosted the commemorative events, dispatching decorations for the veterans of those divisions, of those how do I call it, units, military units. Yes, there actually is a video when well, an elderly guy received, well, just old man. He was summoned to the stage to receive his decoration for serving in Galicia division, and he welcomed the host party, the guy who was awarding him with the order, with a Nazi salute. Were they prosecuted? No, nothing of the kind. So manifestation of Nazism and Nazi ideology, which is based on hatred, it's rooted deeply in Ukraine right now. Unfortunately, that's what happens. With full acquiescence with the West, and that's astounded us Russians, because we in Europe share the common history of defeating the Nazis. Nazism is universal evil. There can be no second guesses on this one. And when Zelensky said that it's going to redevelop nuclear weapons, Nazis with nuclear weapons equals the end of the world. It's just that. It's the end of the world. They'll take us hostages. We can't afford that to happen. So, and well, those Nazi activists, ultranationalists, they became more and more aggressive in social life. You can't do anything about it because you can't punish them by law. So that's basically, well, fostering the unlawfulness and impunity in your society. So when it comes to denazification, it's first to hold responsible all those who are involved in Odessa Massacre, in killings of civilians in Donbass region, to hold them before the law. They should answer to the law. That's it. So, well, if they decide to fight the Russian military, just die in battle, that was their choice. But the objective is to purify the territory of Ukraine of Nazism, because Nazism at our borders is something we cannot afford, and actually something that Europe cannot afford. But just like in the times of Munich agreements, well, the Western powers were okay to succeed, to leave Czechoslovakia and Austria to Nazi Germany, and even Poland. They actually cooperated with the Nazis when the Nazis invaded Czechoslovakia. Poland also invaded Czechoslovakia. They sided with the Nazis. They sided with Nazi Germany. Now they prefer to pose themselves as the victim of war, which is true. Many Poles suffered during World War II. It's true. Poland was, in fact, conquered and occupied by Nazi Germany. It's true. But it's not the whole truth still. It's channeling the Nazi aggression to the east. It's playing with fire. And this is very dangerous. And well, for decades, since when the Soviet Union collapsed, for decades, we've been trying to convince the Ukrainians that, well, cooperation with Russia is just a natural way of things. We don't mind if you cooperate with Europe. We're cooperating with Europe ourselves. There was literally nothing to draw a divisive line on. We're brotherly peoples, well, the mixed marriages and stuff. Half of someone's family lives in Ukraine, other half is in Russia. It's a normal situation. So yes, but unfortunately, that's what happened. This ultranationalism that gave way to Nazism. So
And
why.
And this Azov Regiment is a Nazi organization, because it's interesting. I've posed this question to the Ukrainian ambassador, and she says they aren't. They are not a Nazi organization. They are a patriotic nationalist organization.
No, these are Nazi organizations. It'd be the same like you described SS as German nationalist patriotic organization. No, it's nothing of the kind. There are photos of them, the members of Azov Regiment. It's actually more than battalion now. It's actually bigger than battalion. They just call it Azov Battalion. Them holding their own flag of NATO, mind you, and Nazi flags with swastikas and making Nazi salute. They're Nazis. They're just Nazis. And not only them, there are other battalions as well who worship the same ideology. Because unfortunately, the Ukraine became a fertile ground for these organizations. As I said, they're not prosecuted. They could do whatever they want. They could host their commemorative events of any sort, of any kind, anytime. By the way, the Georgian ribbon, the symbol of one of the symbols of victory in World War II, is also prohibited. So even the veterans of World War II in Ukraine, who served in Red Army and defeated Nazis, the true heroes who defeated Nazis, they're not even eligible to hold the symbols they won the war with. Even the Ukrainian journalists reported that those people, elderly people, mind you, They were attacked by the Ukrainian nationalists in the streets. They basically abused them or just assaulted them in the streets for carrying the Soviet flag. Not even the Soviet flag; it's the flag of the division that put the flag on Reichstag in 1945. You recall that it's one of the most famous World War II photos. So they were holding a replica of this flag to signify the victory, but they were assaulted for this, for holding the symbols, the Soviet symbols. Only Soviet symbols, while the Nazi decorations being, awarded in broad daylight with Nazi salutes, and nothing happens to them. So it's how do I put this? Let's not pretend that it's just Ukrainian issue. Like, let them do whatever they want. Why would you care? No, because for one thing, the world already let that happen once in Germany. We all know what we had in the result. We had the most destructive war in the history of mankind. The Nazis with nuclear weapons can bring the next world war, and it will be the last world war because it's going to be a nuclear war. And at the moment it will be launched, well, let's hope to God it will never happen, because that's basically the end of the world. At that moment, it wouldn't even matter who strike first, because it's just total annihilation of humankind. We cannot let that happen. So this is why Russia intervened as a forced move, because all these years we're talking to NATO, convincing them that there is no reason, and they promised us not to expand east. So we try to convince them of not doing so. We talk to the Ukrainians, saying that like fostering Russophobia won't get you far. And what's the point? Because let's cooperate with each other. It's better because see, the thing here, just speaking industrially and economically, the Soviet economy was built in a way that all Soviet republics would be involved in this or that process. Like let's say assembling a machine. Some parts are made in like Russian Soviet Republic, some parts are made in Ukrainian Soviet Republic, or like in Belarusian Soviet Republic, well, you name it. Pick any. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, these industrial connection lines remained. So this is why we said, like, what's the problem? Our economy was built in a way that it's just like predetermined cooperation. We don't even have to build the infrastructure from scratch. We already have this infrastructure. What's the problem of going on? This is why the CIS was created, the Commonwealth of Independent States, just to make it like a transit period between the Soviet era and post-Soviet era, to maintain the cooperation ties. So it was most puzzling for us, and the West was just like pouring this oil on flames, like further pouring this oil on Ukrainian nationalism. But Ukraine is not Russia. You can't build a national idea of being anti-something. It kind of deprives of your own identity, don't you think? Russia is not possible to be anti-something, because well, Russia is Russia, okay, and only Russia is Russia. And well, same thing with Canada is Canada. It's a childish talk. We can, like, should I name all the UN members and we'll say the same thing about the countries in alphabetic order? That would be just a waste of time. But this idea of the anti-Russia for Ukraine, this is what it led to. This is the idea was behind the Ukraine's actions for the last decades. Unfortunately, because this is one of the consequences of this impunity. Because Ukrainian authorities eventually they thought that since we have West on our side, and we can do whatever, that means we can do whatever it wants, because the West will indulge us anyway. We can host, like even now, we can take provocations, we can kill civilians. The media will blame Russia anyway, so we can do whatever we want. So indulging this impunity makes things go out of control. It's the same with this Russophobia in the West now, like the people are attacking the shops that are owned by Russians, and even the brands that are not Russian actually, like the Stoli vodka. It's actually Latvian, but sound like Russian or look like Russian. They also target it. Well, because they channel this public rage to something, but it's a blind rage, it's a blind frenzy. You're violating the law, my good people. You're violating the law. And turning people into an angry mob never serves you good. Because angry mob is good only for one thing, destruction. If you indulge them, if you say that you can violate the law as long as you say and you're anti-Russian, in the blink of an eye, they will attack something else. And they won't ask for your permission anymore, because this is what mobs, angry mobs are for, destroying. They'll pick another target. Or just let's think it through. If it's legitimized of some sort, these anti-Russian attacks, well, what prevents mobsters from saying I should attack like the Eiffel Tower and say it's an anti-Russian action? It's just in support of Ukraine. Should they destroy Eiffel Tower? You can't do anything to them because yesterday you were okay with this. It will quickly get out of control. It's a very dangerous play. So,
yeah, definitely. But Alex, I see we've run out of time. Thank you so much for your time. This has been such an interesting conversation. I want to give you one last opportunity if you want to add something or to answer a question you hoped I would ask you.
Well, with regards to the media, I guess. Well, people say that Russians are deprived of access to Western media and stuff, and the most of the media in Russia has been blocked. Well, rest assured, it's fake. Most of the media in Russia are fully operational. There were some media blocked for violating the Russian law, because that's the law and you should not violate it. And we also have access to the Western media, actually, far more access than the Westerns have to Russian media, because RTs and Sputniks are blocked for political reasons. And there's nothing else behind it, pure politics. And there are websites in Russia that actually translate the articles from Western media and accumulate in one place. It's called InnoSME. So we actually have access to the Western media. And it's not the problem that, well, there's like Russian total propaganda that clouds Russia's judgment. No, they're actually a way to access the media. And what we see there are fakes using footages from Star Wars, are news about Russians are okay to be attacked, so please violate their rights further. So we see what's going on. And so that's how it is. And well, question more. It's our T slogan, but I can't do it anyway. Question more. The situation around Ukraine is intentionally decontextualized. It doesn't give you the background of the issue to make you think like Russia just all of a sudden woke up in the morning and decided, hey, how about Ukraine? Let's attack it. No, there is deep reasons for this. Threats to Russia's national security, Nazi regimes at our borders, purely anti-Russian politics, and NATO's expansion that doesn't care about Ukrainians at all, or Ukraine's integrity for that matter, only as a foothold against Russia. That's true, sad but true. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alex. To our viewers, you most certainly enjoyed this content. Show your appreciation by liking this video, sharing it as widely as possible, and subscribing to our channel. My name is Donald, and you've been watching WorldView.